The miracle doctor won't be a kept man. Chapter 71. They arrived at Xander Corporation. Before Snow got out of the car, she pointed at her Ferrari convertible parked outside the building. "Get my car repaired, Kiran York." Kiran arched an eyebrow. "That thing's beyond repair. I don't care. If you don't get it done, you can kiss that divorce goodbye," Snow threatened. "You know, you can just admit you love me without using a dumb excuse like that." "I told you, I don't love you. I love your money." Snow's face immediately lit up at the mention of the subject. She looked just like a gold digger as she murmured dreamily, "If I become the daughter-in-law of the York family, the greatest family in Bayville, I'll be like a queen." Kiran could barely contain his amusement at seeing Snow caught up in her fantasy. Were all women such dreamers? "That car's beyond repair. You can have this limited edition in exchange." "I don't care. I want it repaired," Snow insisted indignantly with teary eyes. The car was precious to her as it was a symbol of her parents' love. Her stubbornness initially rendered Kiran speechless, but a mischievous thought soon popped into his head. He asked jokingly, "Can a woman repair her virginity after losing it?" "Yeah, the hospital offers special surgery for that," Snow answered without thinking. "Wow!" Kiran exclaimed, his eyes widening. "You didn't get yours repaired, did you?" Snow's pleasant mood was instantly replaced with hot anger. What the hell was this jerk thinking? "You don't have to explain, I understand." Kiran interrupted her with a wave of his hand before hopping out of the car and fleeing. "Damn you, Kiran York!" Recovering from her outrage, Snow screamed after him. The employees of Xander Corporation who were arriving for work could not help themselves from gawking at the scene. "You can't kill me just because you weren't happy with my performance last night." "Wah!" Kiran wailed as he ran off like a wife who had been mistreated by her husband. Snow was lost for words. What was that scumbag blabbering about? They were at her office, for God's sake. "Mr. Kiran, try taking Viagra," a female employee called out boldly. It drove Snow mad to see the staff seemingly buying into his claim. She got out of the car and stormed toward the lobby, determined to tear him to shreds once he returned. Kiran was full of glee. Clearly, Snow was a pure woman who took care in preserving her virginity. It was also obvious that she planned to follow him everywhere out of concern for his safety. However, he had a lot on his plate at the moment. He needed to take revenge on the three big families first. Getting caught up in romance? That was not his style. Kiran exited the building and hurried to Ironwest Park. Meanwhile, a big crowd had gathered at the door of Block Unit 1, Ironwest Park. "Let's make this quick, Mrs. Wilson. Just give me $10,000 for the 3 months' rent you owe." An immaculately dressed man with slicked-down hair said haughtily, "But I don't owe you any rent, Mr. Fableman." "Why are you asking me to give you $10,000? Margaret asked innocently. "You need to pay a deposit when renting a house, but you've never paid anything during your 3 years here. Now, I want to take this house back. I'll charge you a deposit of 1 month's rent for every year you stayed, which makes a total of $10,000. Is that amount not lenient enough for you?" The young man named Barry Fableman replied arrogantly. "Mr. Fableman, people pay deposits when they can't guarantee that they'll be able to afford the rent, but I've never paid my rent late. I can move out if you want to take this house back, but I don't see why I should give you that $10,000. Besides, my monthly rent is only $500, so why would 3 months' rent add up to $10,000? Margaret protested woefully. Chapter 72. "I said what I said. How dare you talk back to me?" Barry glowered at her. The onlookers all sympathized with Margaret, but no one dared to stand up for her. The whole building belonged to Barry, and they were his tenants. If they were to say the wrong thing, they would land themselves in hot water, too. Margaret tried to bargain with him. "How about I give you $1,500 and then I move out?" "10,000!" Barry sneered, refusing to change his mind. Even if I sell everything in my home, I'll still fall short of that amount." Margaret was distressed. "You just don't want to pay up, do you?" Barry snarled. "There is something worth more than $10,000 in your home, though." Margaret was confused. She and her daughter, Rain, were already struggling just to stay alive, so how could there be something so valuable in her home? Barry drew close to her and whispered, "If you don't have money, you can offer your daughter's first time instead. If you let her sleep with me once, I'll give you $10,000. "No way," Margaret rejected, turning pale. Her daughter was Kieran's fiancée, and she had just been rescued from Mitchell Quinn's lair the day before. In the past, she had blindly waited for Kieran without knowing if he was alive or dead. Now that he was back, she was even more determined to stay loyal to the York family in life and in death. Is that so? Barry curled his lip. Then you owe me 30,000. Huh? You can't rip me off like that, Mr. Fableman. The color drained from Margaret's face. 50,000. With a cruel smile, Barry turned to the bystanders. Can any of you bear witness to that? The bystanders sympathized with Margaret, so they remained silent. No one? Barry demanded coldly. I'll bear witness to Mrs. Wilson's debt of 50,000. Someone spoke up for fear that they would get into trouble. With one person taking the lead, the rest quickly chimed in. Barry's expression was smug. Pay up, Mrs. Wilson. 50,000, and not a single cent less. Margaret's face was ashen. She did not have that much money. If she did, she would not have to rent a place here. Please, Mr. Fableman, I... Smack. Barry slapped her. Don't push your luck, old hag. Pay up. His two bodyguards barked, stepping forward. I really don't have that much money. Margaret covered her swollen cheek and wept. Then find a way to get it. You're not the only person in your family, Barry growled. I'll never give you my daughter. She's already engaged, Margaret wailed. To who? Who would dare steal the woman I want from me? Enraged, Barry lifted his hand to strike Margaret again. By this time, everyone had realized that Barry was infatuated with Margaret's daughter, Rain. It was no surprise, given Rain's breathtaking beauty. Me! Kieran's voice suddenly rang out, and his fingers closed around Barry's wrist the next instant. His grip tightened only slightly, but to Barry it felt like his hand was clamped by iron pliers, numbing half of his body. Ah, he howled in pain. Bursting with fury, he glared at his bodyguards. Destroy him! You're dead meat! They roared as they raised their fists in attack. With a sweep of his arm, Kieran flung Barry at them. Bam! The bodyguard's punches collided with Barry's body. Arrgh! He let out a blood-curdling shriek, and his eyes rolled back into his head. The two bodyguards were stunned for a moment, but before they could make their next move, Kieran raised his foot and sent them flying with two kicks. Trying to steal my wife? Kieran's icy voice hissed in Barry's ear. A shiver ran down Barry's spine, but he forced himself to retort, Touch me and you'll die. Kieran, don't touch him, Margaret cried out. Chapter 73. Kieran shot Margaret a puzzled look. Before she could explain, Barry said pompously, You're not as dumb as I thought, old hag. At least you know you shouldn't mess with me. He struggled to free himself from Kieran's grip, snarling, You'd better not mess with me, punk. Kieran let him go, wondering what gave this idiot the nerve to challenge him. Having regained his freedom, Barry massaged his wrist and the spot his bodyguards hit accidentally. Leveling a menacing look at Kieran, he jabbed a finger at the 6-story building. You see this apartment, punk? Kieran nodded. Yeah, and what about it? Ha! Barry snorted at his apparent foolishness. What about it, you ask? Do you own an apartment building? Let me tell you. This entire building belongs to me. Oh, Kieran seemed astounded, but he soon resumed an expression of indifference. Barry had intended to take advantage of Kieran's shock to continue his boast, but he ended up having to stop himself awkwardly. However, he promptly surmised that Kieran was feigning composure, which bolstered his confidence. But this building's not important. More importantly, this entire block of apartments belongs to one single family. Barry gestured toward the surrounding apartment blocks, pride written all over his face. This time, Kieran was genuinely surprised. Your family? Barry was about to carry on bragging, but the question struck a raw nerve in him. He certainly hoped that the whole block belonged to his family, but that would only happen in another life. He sucked in a deep breath. No, the Ziegler family. The Ziegler family? Kieran snickered inwardly. Yes, one of the 3 big families in Bayville. Barry's eyes glowed triumphantly. Who would have the guts to touch the property of Bayville's topmost ruler? To be specific, they're managed by my cousin Fabian Ziegler. Astonished, Kieran turned to Margaret for confirmation. Margaret nodded sadly. That was why she had stopped him. In her view, Kieran could not afford to antagonize the Ziegler family. He could not even let them know of his identity. It just occurred to Kiran that the common people were unaware of what had happened at last night's banquet. The guests had not dared to speak of it either. After all, it was a blood feud between the three big families and the York family. He regarded Barry calmly. "Well then, how do you want to settle this?" "I want her to give me 100,000 and get her ass out of here," Barry said loftily. "Mr. Fableman, I thought you said 50,000. Margaret's face turned as white as a sheet. 100,000. Barry's expression held nothing but arrogance. "No, make that 1,000,000! Mr. Fableman." The world spun dizzily before Margaret's eyes. Kiran caught her quickly and looked at Barry. "I'll give you 1,000,000. The latter was taken aback by Kiran's proposition. Was it true that Rainfrost was his wife? Irritated by the thought, Barry narrowed his slanted eyes. "I've changed my mind. I want 10,000,000 now." Unable to breathe properly, Margaret found her body toppling backward. A hush fell over the bystanders as they glanced at Kiran sympathetically. However, no one was brave enough to stand up for him. They could not afford to offend Barry or the Ziegler family. Kiran cocked a brow. To everyone's bewilderment, he chuckled and fixed his stare on Barry. "I think 10,000,000 isn't enough, though." "What do you mean?" Barry was startled. 100,000,000. Kiran raised a finger. Barry was stunned for a moment before bursting into laughter. "So, you're a fool, huh? Very well. Can't say no to extra money, right?" He held out his hand, his lip curling scornfully at Kiran. "Pay up!" However, Kiran's lips only stretched into a perfect smile. "You're the one who should pay you." What did you say?" Barry was furious. "Give me 100,000,000 and this matter will be settled, or I'll have to resort to drastic measures." Kiran was far more aggressive. Barry rolled his eyes and sneered viciously. "Are you stupid? You're the one who needs to pay me. Besides, you can't afford to take my money. You'll end up dead before you know it." "Why can't I afford to take your money?" Kiran scoffed. "In fact, I suggest you call Fabian Ziegler to come here and deal with this matter." "You're really asking me to pay?" Barry seethed. "Are you stupid? Did you not hear what I said?" Kiran taunted. Barry glanced at his bodyguards, who were picking themselves up off the ground. "Kill him." "Huh?" The bodyguards were still reeling from the shock and force of Kiran's kicks. Instead of attacking him, they backed away hastily. Barry was dumbfounded. Kiran helped Margaret sit against the wall, then started making his way to Barry. Sensing his intimidating aura and remembering how he had subdued his bodyguards, Barry began to quake inside. What are you trying to do?" "Call Fabian Ziegler," Kiran commanded frostily. Barry turned pale. Smack! Kiran dealt him a tight slap. "Don't make me say it a third time." "Ah!" Barry yowled. Kiran raised his hand again. Barry fell flat on his rear in fright. Kiran's palm collided with his cheek mercilessly, producing a loud slap and sending Barry sprawling across the ground. 10 minutes. If Fabian Ziegler arrives so much as a minute late, I'll break one of your legs. "Let's see how many legs you have," Kiran snarled. Barry was shaking all over. Knowing Kiran was perfectly serious, he pulled out his phone and dialed Fabian's number fearfully. Fabian had just crawled off a woman's body. After being cured by Kiran the night before, he felt his whole body bursting with endless desire and infinite passion. The memory of his partner begging for mercy last night filled him with vigor and pride. He even imagined that she was Snow Xander. In 7 days, Kiran York would be erased from existence, and then he would celebrate his demise by getting into Snow Xander's pants. The thought of himself sleeping with the wife of a man who had cured his impotence filled him with sheer delight. Just then, his phone rang. When he saw that it was a call from Barry, he tapped on the accept button. "What's up?" "Fabian. See, can you come to Ironwest Park for a bit?" Barry asked nervously. "For what?" Fabian sounded annoyed. Barry had always managed Ironwest Park, and Fabian had given him one of the apartments as a reward for his hard work. Usually, he only needed to lounge about and wait for the money to come rolling in. It was an absolute pleasure to make millions every year without getting his hands dirty. He was not pleased to hear that his presence was requested today. "A guy just hit me and told me to give him 100,000,000. Barry's voice was trembling. "Who hit you?" Fabian was instantly enraged. "I don't know. I was pressuring old Mrs. Wilson into offering you Rainfrost, but a man showed up claiming he was her husband and hit me. Rainfrost? The name sounded familiar to Fabian, but he could not recall who it was. Fabian Ziegler, if you don't show up in 10 minutes, you can start planning Barry's funeral, Kiran interrupted them brusquely. Kieran York. The blood drained from Ziegler's face. Who's Kieran York? Barry was perplexed. He had not been qualified to attend the banquet at the Royal Oasis Hotel, so naturally he had no idea. Me, duh, Kiran declared haughtily. I'll be there right away. Worried that Kiran would resort to murder, Fabian cut the call, got dressed, and made for Ironwest Park at high speed. Chapter 74. The morning sun shone on everyone who had gathered at the scene, but none of them could feel its warmth. Even Barry felt like he was in the depths of an icy pit. As the seconds ticked by, he grew more and more apprehensive that Fabian would not be able to make it within 10 minutes. Meanwhile, Fabian was running red lights and speeding his way to his destination. He had managed to recall who Rainfrost was, the woman who had caused Mitchell Quinn to lose his life. She was bad news, which meant Barry was going to be in major trouble. He had no idea how Kiran and Rain were related, but if Kiran could kill Mitchell for her, he would take out Barry without batting an eye. Whether Barry lived or died was none of his concern. Most importantly, the three big families had to stay out of Kieran York's way for 7 days. Despite their fury and humiliation, they had no choice except to endure. Ironwest Park, time's up, Kiran suddenly announced. Barry felt like he was in the jaws of death. Despite himself, his whole body shook as he glanced desperately in the direction of the community gates, but there was still no sign of Fabian. Before he could open his mouth, Kiran abruptly raised his foot and brought it down. Before Barry could register it, he heard the crack of bones shattering, and then he felt a terrible pain in his leg. Argh! An anguished shriek escaped from his lips. It felt as if his right foot had been chopped off. He wrapped his hands instinctively around it, only to find it dripping with blood. His ankle was almost detached from his calf, leaving only skin connecting them. Holy crap! Shouts and screams erupted from the crowd. Some people fled the scene frantically. For every minute he's late, I'll break off one limb. If he doesn't show up, you'll die. Kieran's voice was as calm and suffocating as deep waters. Beads of sweat rolled down Barry's face as he howled. He took out his phone and dialed Fabian's number with trembling, blood-coated hands. Before he could make the call, he saw Fabian's car zipping toward them like lightning. He heaved a sigh of relief. At least he would not have to die. When Fabian caught sight of Barry's broken right foot from afar, his eyes blazed with rage. Kiran was truly the devil incarnate. Fabian may be a mere minion, but he still represented the Ziegler family. Kiran was basically destroying the Ziegler family's dignity. He accelerated toward them. Kiran remained completely unmoved, as if he had not seen Fabian arrive. "Save me, Fabian!" Barry wailed. Fabian slammed down on the brakes and jumped out of his car. "Another minute has passed!" Kiran's foot moved as soon as he spoke. Another loud crack sounded, along with Barry's scream of agony. All the Ironwest Park tenants could not help but shudder. It sounded like someone had encountered a ghost in broad daylight. Fabian's facial features contorted with wrath. Kiran's ruthlessness was far beyond his imagination. Fabian, help me take revenge," Barry croaked tearfully. The veins on Fabian's forehead bulged. He stared daggers at Kiran, but at the same time, he felt powerless. He would kill Kiran if he could. If he could. "You want to stick up for him?" Kiran snorted. At once, all the anger in Fabian's body dissipated like a rubber ball deflating. Take revenge. How? Thinking back to the day he had proposed in front of the Xander Corporation building and ended up being thrown into the rose bush, he considered himself lucky. Kieran York was a thug. Another minute has passed. Kiran lifted his foot again. Fabian shouted anxiously, "Kieran York, you—" The sound of bones fracturing rang out once more. Barry's right arm was immediately severed from his body. "Grach," Barry screeched before passing out. "I'm already here, Kiran. Why are you still hurting him?" Fabian found this far more tormenting and infuriating than being slapped in the face. "Oh, you're here?" "Ha," Kiran chuckled. "I'd have thought you weren't here if you hadn't spoken." Fabian squeezed his eyes shut in frustration. As there was no one in the three big families capable of standing up to Kiran at the moment, he had no choice but to stifle his anger. "What do you want?" "He forced my mother to give him 100 million. Kiran pointed at Margaret, who lay unconscious on the ground. "Your mother?" Fabian glanced at Margaret's wrinkled face in confusion. Had Kiran's mother survived the massacre back then? Chapter 75. "She's my mother-in-law," Kiran replied coolly. "Ooh." Fabian let out an exhale before sniggering at him. "Isn't your wife Snow, Xander? If you can sleep with a different woman every night." "Why can't I have multiple wives?" Kiran retorted indifferently. Fabian was lost for words. "That's enough chit-chat. Barry Fableman asked for 100 million just now, but now I want 400 million. Kiran held up 4 fingers. This is daylight robbery," Fabian yelled in protest. 500 million. With that, Kiran brought down his foot again. Barry jerked awake unexpectedly, only to find himself in a more miserable state. Now that his left arm was also gone, he had become a complete cripple. Only his torso remained. Fabian was utterly horrified by Kiran's cruelty. "Compared to the tragic deaths of all those York family members, this is nothing." Bitterness flashed in Kiran's eyes. Fabian's fury melted away, and a chill ran down his spine. He realized Kiran was waiting for the members of the 3 big families to get into trouble so he could exact his vengeance. As the most eminent young man in Bayville, he knew better than to value dignity over life right now. "I'll give you the money." Kiran handed Fabian the bank card Snow had given him the day before. "Transfer the money to this card. It belongs to Snow." Fabian took the card at once and made a call to arrange a transfer. Once it was done, he returned the card to Kiran. "There, your 500 million. Kiran patted Fabian's cheek. "Mr. Fabian, I'm glad you know what's good for you." How embarrassing it was for Fabian, the heir to the great Ziegler family. To have his cheek patted like that. Smack. Without warning, Kiran landed a slap across his face. "I'll hit you every time I see you, you'd better remember that." Fabian had already been humiliated enough, but being slapped only added to his indignation. Kiran pointed at Margaret. "This is my mother, and Rain Frost is my wife. The 3 big families had better keep this in mind. Anyone who lays a hand on them will end up like Barry Fableman." Ferocity and murderousness exuded from him. Fabian's wrath vanished in an instant, and he remained silent. He could not afford to upset Kiran York. "Now get lost." With a kick, Kiran sent Barry landing in front of Fabian's car. Barry was completely unresponsive, just like a corpse. Swallowing his shame, Fabian ordered his bodyguards to put away Barry's severed limbs and rush him to the hospital. He longed to grab a gun and turn Kiran into a beehive for being so brutal. Unfortunately, he had to put up with it like a coward. The remaining spectators scampered off in terror. Kiran watched Fabian's car disappear into the distance with an icy smile on his lips. "This is just the beginning. For the next 3 months I will make the 3 big families suffer so bad, they'll wish for a swift death instead." He turned around to pick up Margaret. "Mom, what happened?" Just then, Rain's horrified and tearful voice was heard. She dashed over and threw her arms around her unconscious mother. "She's fine. I made her take a little nap," Kiran explained. He had been worried Barry's torture would be too bloody for Margaret, so he had seized the opportunity to knock her out. Only then did Rain realize Kiran was there. "Kiran, you're here!" She blushed, and her eyes shimmered with joy. However, Kiran noticed that she had been crying. Kiran nodded and gathered Margaret into his arms. "Let's talk inside." Rain straightened up and led the way. Kiran nearly threw up the moment he stepped into the corridor. It was filled with a damp, musty smell worse than his old, thatched hut on the mountain. He furrowed his brow and decided that he would help them move out of this place. He had deliberately revealed their identities just now to prevent them from future harassment, but now it seemed that they would have to move out right away. After entering their room, Kiran revived Margaret. Seeing that Kiran was safe and sound, she embraced him. "Kiran, you can't go up against the 3 big families. They're just too powerful and cruel." Kiran's heart ached. It was fortunate that the remaining York family members had managed to stay alive for the past 20 years. However, they had had to live like pigs. Margaret was surprised to see Rain. "Why aren't you at work?" Rain burst into tears. Chapter 76. What happened? Kiran grabbed Rain's hand. The warmth of his hand gave Rain a sense of security, but she shook her head. Nothing. Nothing at all. You're lying. Kiran was vexed. Rain's pretty face turned red. She bowed her head and stared at the tips of her white shoes, refusing to speak. What sort of internship are you doing? Kiran pressed. Rain, I thought you had to do your senior year internship before you graduate. Why did you come back? Margaret asked. Rain kept her head lowered as she wept. What happened? Kiran gripped her by the shoulders. This woman was just like a sister to him. Rain burst into tears again. The company won't accept me. The light in Margaret's eyes immediately dimmed with sorrow. She had spent her whole life breaking her back to send Rain to college. What were they going to do if she could not graduate because she failed to complete her internship? What's your major? Why won't they accept you? Kiran asked coldly. I'm majoring in management. Our whole class was supposed to start our internship at Xander Corporation today, but for some reason, they said my name was not on the list and wouldn't let me in. Rain explained through sobs. Rain's eyes blazed with fury. There was certainly something fishy going on. Rain threw her arms around him anxiously. It's all right, Kiran. You don't have to talk to them for me. Kiran's heart broke as he looked at the mother and daughter before him. Years of struggling at the bottom of society had shaped their submissive personalities. Can you do your internship at Xander Corporation? Kiran asked, controlling his anger. Xander Corporation. That was a far more renowned company than Zenith. Rain's eyes brightened with delight, but the next second they darkened again. I won't make it into a big company like that. Kiran knew different. His anger dissipated, and he lifted a hand to wipe Rain's tears away. I'll deal with this matter. Don't worry about it. He then looked at Margaret. Mom, let's not stay here anymore. I'll find another place for you. Kiran, this place is all right. The rent for other places. Margaret frowned sadly. Although she did not finish her sentence, the implication was that other places were too expensive. Just then, Kiran remembered that Adrian Lane was selling his house. If he bought it, they would get to live in his neighborhood, and he could look after them whenever necessary. He took out a business card and looked at Rain. Do you have a cell phone? Call this number for me. Margaret and Rain realized that Kiran did not own a phone. Thinking he had no money, they were even more reluctant to let him burden himself. Rain sneaked a glance at her mother, who opened her mouth to speak. However, Kiran promptly reached into Rain's pocket and pulled out her phone. His hand brushed her shapely thigh through her jeans, but the contact was almost enough to make her squeak. A strange feeling welled up in her chest. Kiran remained indifferent as he dialed a number. It rang only once before being answered. Hello, this is Adrian Lane. Hello, Dr. Lane. It's Kiran York. Dr. York, I'm so glad you called me. Adrian leaped for joy at the other end of the phone. I heard this morning that you were selling your house. Has it been sold? Kiran went straight to the point. Nope. Adrian understood right away that Kiran was looking for a house. If you need it, go ahead and stay in it. It doesn't matter if I sell it or not. Great. I'll be there soon. I'll pay you later. Sure. I'll head back now and give you the keys, Adrian agreed readily. Kiran hung up. Mom, Rain, come with me. I found you a place to stay. Where? Margaret was still worried. Marina Breeze Court. But that place is so expensive. We can't possibly afford the rent. Margaret shook her head in refusal. Kiran wrapped an arm around her shoulders. Mom, from now on, I'll take care of you. You don't need to work or worry about money anymore. Kiran, I'm still physically able to work. You should save your money for yourself. When you and Rain get married, you'll need to spend a lot. Margaret tried her best to persuade him. Mom. Although Rain already thought of herself as Kiran's wife, she was still embarrassed. What are you embarrassed for, silly girl? Kiran's our family. Besides, the houses in this city can easily cost millions. I heard it's the same for Marina Breeze Court, too. Both of you have to start saving up from now on, Margaret advised. Rain was as red as a beetroot. Her mother was talking as if she was going to marry Kiran soon. Chapter 77. However, she could not help stealing an overjoyed peek at Kiran. After years of listening to her mother speak about him, she had come to think of him as her husband, although she did not know what had gone down at No. 3. Dragonview residences the day before, Kiran, returning unscathed, signified that he was no ordinary man. Everyone knew Mitchell Quinn was the overlord of Bayville University. "Mom, I'm the master of the great York family. Why do you think I can't afford a house or support you and Rain?" Kiran teased Margaret to soothe her concerns. Margaret scanned their surroundings with a pale face. After ensuring that the coast was clear, she finally relaxed and said to Kiran warningly, "You must never reveal your identity to other people. If the three big families find out, you'll be in danger." Kiran's heart ached. Poor Margaret was absolutely terrified. Despite her fear, she continued to wait and search for him. He was immensely moved by her love and devotion. "Mom, just relax. I'll work hard and buy a villa for you in the future." He then looked at Rain. "Bring your personal items with you. You don't have to bring anything else. But all this can still be used." Margaret began to protest, but Kiran was already leading her away. He knew that if they continued arguing, she would end up taking everything with her. While he understood that even the poorest homes had items of value, he refused to let them suffer anymore. They took a cab to Marina Breeze Court. Adrian was already waiting downstairs when they arrived, and spotting Kiran, he hurried over. "Dr. York, here are your keys." Kiran took them from him. "Thank you, Dr. Lane. Rain will sign the contract with you tomorrow. I'll pay you then." "No problem. Please make yourselves comfortable." Adrian could tell from Margaret and Rain's shabby clothes that they were not wealthy people. "This is my mother and sister. Don't worry, I'll make sure the money is paid." Kiran introduced them. "Nice to meet you, ma'am," Adrian greeted politely. Being greeted by such a distinguished-looking man flustered Margaret so much she could hardly speak, so Rain had to return the greeting on her behalf. Rain wondered why Kiran had introduced her as his sister. Not that she was upset by it, though. It would have been so embarrassing if he had introduced her as his wife. Adrian led Kiran upstairs, and the latter almost laughed when he found that Adrian's apartment was on the same floor as Snow's. This made it easier for him to take care of Margaret and Rain. Both apartments on the same floor share an elevator. I'll leave everything inside the way they are. "I'll only take some of my personal belongings with me, so feel free to use everything else as you wish," said Adrian. "Don't worry, Dr. Lane. If the maintenance fees go up, I'll be sure to pay you extra." Kiran had always been a man who treated others the way they treated him. Adrian was not too concerned about it since he admired Kiran for his medical skills. He swiftly packed his father's belongings and carried them out with Kiran's help. After seeing off Adrian, Kiran remembered that Margaret and Rain still needed daily necessities, so he went to Snow's apartment and retrieved all the toiletries she had bought for him. They did not wonder where the items were from. They were just happy that he was so thoughtful. The reality of moving into such a spacious, brightly lit place brought Margaret to tears. "Mom, why are you crying?" Kiran asked. I just thought of our late masters and mistresses. Back then, our family residence was much, much grander than this, but now, their bodies are nowhere to be found, and they don't even have a proper resting place," Margaret wept mournfully. Kiran's heart felt as if it was being ripped to shreds. He was definitely going to make the three big families perish, and not in a pleasant way. Noticing Kiran's grim expression, Rain grabbed her mother's arm. "Mom, that's enough. Our lives will get better from now on." Realizing she had lost her composure, Margaret wiped away her tears. "Remember, Kiran, you must never reveal your identity or cross the three big families." Kiran nodded. "Don't worry." He turned to Rain. "I'll bring you to Xander Corporation for your internship." Rain was still hesitating, but Kiran took her hand and led her out. Margaret watched them leave with a contented, hopeful smile on her face. She was even hoping that they would have a child soon so the deceased York family members could rest in peace. Chapter 78. At the entrance of Xander Corporation, Rain glanced at Kiran, her face pale with nervousness. "Kiran, will they hire me?" "They will hire you." Smiling, Kiran led her inside by the hand. When the security guards caught sight of him, they immediately ran out and greeted him with a smile. "Good day to you, Mr. Kiran." Kiran nodded and continued walking, while Rain followed in bewilderment. The security guards secretly shot Kiran a thumbs up. What a badass, marching into the company building hand in hand with a young woman. Wasn't he afraid of incurring the CEO's wrath? He was truly a role model for men. As soon as Kiran entered the lobby, the pretty receptionist rose to her feet. Good day to you, Mr. Kiran. However, her eyes were on Rain. Where's the HR department? Kiran asked candidly. Office number 629, the receptionist answered quickly. Kiran pressed the elevator button and tugged Rain inside. The receptionist's lashes fluttered. Was Mr. Kiran having an affair? Did this mean she had a chance? Her eyes were shining. Still, she picked up the phone and reported the matter to Snow. Rain found the whole situation somewhat suspicious. Everyone here addressed Kiran as Mr. Kiran and stared at her curiously as if she was an alien. Kiran, you work here? I don't. Why do they call you by your name? You call me by my name too. Rain blushed. How was that the same? They were giving me weird stares. Rain told him. Probably because you're pretty. Anyone would envy your looks, Kiran said nonchalantly. Rain blushed even harder, and her palms started to sweat. Did Kiran think she was pretty because he was in love with her? Did this mean they were going to get married, and make love, and have kids soon? All kinds of wild thoughts ran through Rain's mind. Moreover, Kiran was the only York family member left, so she saw it as her obligation. Instinctively, her grip tightened on his hand. Kiran's goal was far simpler, though. Arriving at Office No, he knocked on the door twice before opening it. Seated inside was a young woman who had just put down the phone. When she saw Kiran, she stood up at once, beaming. Mr. Kiran, what brings you here? Kiran did not recognize the woman in front of him. She was about 1.7 meters tall, dressed in typical office attire, and in her mid-20s. She exuded a mature feminine charm and was undeniably considered beautiful by most standards. Give her a job. Kiran pointed at Rain. The woman was the Human Resources Director, Serena Zimmerman. Naturally, she did not dare neglect his order. Mr. Kiran, which university did she graduate from? What degree does she hold? Having no idea, Kiran glanced at Rain. Rain's cheeks were pink. My name is Rainfrost. I'm a senior student majoring in management at Bayville University and currently looking for an internship. Serena gaped at Kiran in disbelief. Damn, was he interested in college girls too? Is there a suitable position? Asked Kiran. I'll get someone to check. Serena recovered hastily from her shock. Never mind that. Just let her work as a secretary, Kiran decided on the spot. Secretary? Serena was startled. Positions like this were usually appointed by Snow herself. No one could become a secretary. Moreover, one was already hired. Just hire her as an extra secretary to assist me. Seeing her hesitate, Kiran suggested. Serena's eyes widened in bafflement. Kiran did not even work there. Why would he need a secretary? Did he have a kink for... Serena was about to start worshipping Kiran for having the guts to hire his own secretary in his wife's company. What a king. He was still holding Rain's hand, which made them appear like a pair of lovers. Is there a problem? Kiran asked when she did not answer. No, not at all. I'll walk her through the onboarding process right away. Serena immediately called for an employee to handle the onboarding process. Rain was still weirded out by the situation. While it was a relief that the people here showed Kiran deference, she could not ignore the strange looks directed at her. Kiran, on the other hand, was relaxed. In fact, he was contemplating how he would drive Snow insane in a while. After the hiring process was completed, Kiran was ready to leave with Rain. Just then, Serena whipped her head around to face him. Mr. Kiran, do you need another secretary? He blinked in surprise. What do you mean? If you do, I can be your secretary too, Serena offered, blushing. Kiran instantly realized Serena had misunderstood that he was keeping a sugar baby. Does our company provide benefits? Serena was puzzled by his question. Of course. Do we provide Viagra? He grinned. Fifth! Serena burst into laughter, recalling how one of the employees had recommended Viagra to Kiran after he had divulged his failure to satisfy Snow's needs. Kiran pulled a mystified Rain out of the room and headed to Snow's office. Serena hurriedly called Snow to report the situation. The latter was already seething after receiving the call from the front desk. When she learned that Rain had been hired as a secretary, she hurled the phone to the floor in a rage. Serena patted her heart over her chest. Mr. Kiran, let's hope you can conquer Miss Snow with that Viagra. Kiran led Rain to Snow's office. This is the CEO's office. Rain nervously moved to smooth down her clothes, but Kiran was already opening the door, her hand still in his. Snow's expression turned stormy as she wondered, with indignation, what the woman Kiran had boldly brought back with him looked like. She did not think Kiran would waltz in hand with Rain. They looked just like lovers showing off to her. Snow felt her clothes grow tight around her body, and she was even more baffled when she noticed Rain's beauty. How did that scumbag manage to find such a gorgeous woman? Kiran lifted an eyebrow at Snow, but before he could open his mouth, Snow approached them with a smile and held out her hand. "Welcome to our company, Rain. I hope you'll work hard and strive for rapid progress." Rain was taken aback to be greeted so warmly by the CEO herself. "Nice to meet you, Miss Xander." "Miss Xander? Oh no, you can just call me Snow when we're alone." After saying that, Snow reached up to adjust Kiran's clothes. "If your brother bullies you, you can always come to me, your dear sister-in-law." "Sister-in-law?" Rain froze. Kiran swore inwardly. Was this Hellcat seriously starting a harem war? Snow flashed Kiran a brilliant smile as if to say, "Two can play at this game." Rain stared at Kiran, confusion swimming in her beautiful eyes. Chapter 79. "Rain, sweetie, Kiran and I are married and living together. Why else do you think he could bring you to my company as he pleased?" Snow linked her arm through Rain's. "From now on, think of this place as your home. Work hard, and I'll let you manage your own company in the future." She then turned to Kiran. "Honey, why don't you guide Rain while she's here? You should consider starting a new business so Rain can have a go at managing, too." Rain stood rooted to the spot. Her body felt cold, and her heart was in disarray. She had waited for Kiran all these years, only to learn that he was already married. Her eyes reddened, and she was at a loss for words. Kiran was exasperated. What was this mad woman blabbering about? Had she forgotten he was planning to divorce her? Before he could explain, Snow interrupted him. "Come with me, sweetie. My secretary Bella will show you the ropes." With that, she took Rain's hand and led her out of the office. Rain walked out slowly, her mind blank and her heart in turmoil. Before Kiran could run out after them, Snow spun round and came back. She folded her arms across her chest and beamed at him triumphantly like a general returning from a victorious battle. "Have you lost your mind?" Kiran snapped. "Excuse me, you think you're a king now because I didn't chew you out for getting a sugar baby, huh?" Snow said darkly, the smile disappearing from her face. "Sugar baby?" Kiran snorted. "All right then. Since I've found a sugar baby, this means you lost our bet last night. Time to keep up your end of the deal." "Did I agree to the bet?" Snow cocked a brow. "Of course you did." "What was the bet about?" Snow pretended to look innocent. "Trying to play dumb, aren't you?" Kiran huffed. "Loser says I love you to the other person." Snow struggled to contain her amusement and waved a hand. "I get it! You love me!" "You can stop now, it's so corny." You... Kiran was about to explode with fury. To think that he had been tricked by this girl. Pfeft! Snow could not stop herself from bursting into giggles and the gleeful expression from spreading over her face. Kiran fumed. "Are you going to say it or not?" "No." Snow straightened up deliberately. "And what are you going to do about it?" "I'm going to tell the whole company that I'm divorcing you." Kiran started to turn away. "Stop right there." Snow's temper flared. Kiran snickered. "Well, are you going to say it or not?" "You." Snow stamped her foot. "Fine, it's not a big deal anyway." Kiran's anger faded a little. Snow drew the words out reluctantly. "I love you." Appeased, Kiran opened his mouth to speak. "Your money! Ha-ha!" Snow finished her sentence and dissolved into peals of laughter. Kiran wanted to throttle this woman so badly. She was just so infuriating. Snow raised her eyebrows at Kiran and said mockingly, "I love your money. Humph!" Knowing that she was riling him up on purpose, he let out a huff and spun on his heel. "Oh, I forgot to tell you that I've received your 500 million, Snow reminded him with a grin. Only then did he remember Fabian's 500 million, and he stopped hastily in his tracks. "That's my money. I'm your wife. What's yours is mine, which means your money is mine," Snow retorted defiantly. The corners of Kiran's mouth twitched. I also forgot to tell you that the card I gave you is a credit card, the kind that doesn't allow you to withdraw money. So you can swipe the card as you please, but I'll be notified of every single cent you spend," Snow continued smugly. Are you trying to be some kind of bossy housewife?" Kiran bit out. Snow snapped her fingers. That's right. I am preparing to become the great York family's mistress. You. Utterly defeated, Kiran flung the door open and stormed out. He needed to explain the truth to Rain in case she got dangerously depressed. Chapter 80. He could not let her and Margaret down after they had suffered so much waiting for him. The smile on Snow's face vanished, and she waved her fist at the door. Stupid jerk! How dare you bring back a sugar baby? If you're not careful, I'll cut off your weenie and turn you into a eunuch. Now she understood that she would have to forego all shame when reasoning with Kiran, or she would have an aneurysm. Her grandpa had called her earlier that day just to tell her to conceive Kiran's child as soon as possible, which only added to her distress. After being assigned to her new office by Bella, Rain sat at her desk in a disconcerted daze. Before this, she had really thought of herself as Kiran's wife, and was even ready to give birth to a child for him and the York family. But he was already married. What was she going to do? Her phone buzzed. She picked it up and found that it was a message tagging everyone in her class WhatsApp group. Similar replies popped up one after the other under the original message. Rain's heart only grew heavier as she was the only one who did not have the opportunity to intern at Xander Corporation. Frustrated, she tapped on the screen to exit the app. Another text came, this time from a girl named Flying Snow. Immediately after that, the screen was flooded with similar messages from everyone else in the group. Rain stared at her phone. She could imagine the smirking faces of all the people on the other end, waiting for her to embarrass herself. This was the hard truth. The bitterness in her swelled. In the end, she replied with a simple "got it." A series of cheering emojis exploded in the group. Rain felt as if her heart was being penetrated by needles. She may have found a place to start her internship, but it was, regrettably, Kiran's wife's company. What would happen to her, his original fiancée? Creak! The door to the office opened, and Kiran walked in. Kiran! Rain shot to her feet a little awkwardly. You can sit, Rain. Kiran sat down in the seat opposite to hers. Rain followed suit. Kiran gazed at her red-rimmed eyes, remembering how she had chosen to jump to her death just to protect her purity. He also remembered how Margaret had ended her own son's life in exchange for his. He did not think he could ever repay her for that. Rain intertwined her fingers, a little unnerved by Kiran's silence. Rain, let me tell you the truth. Kiran began to explain why he had come to Bayville and what he had been through during his time here. He even told her honestly about the trauma Snow had inflicted upon him and his plan to divorce her. This produced a sliver of hope in Rain's heart. Most importantly, she now knew that Snow and Kiran were not an actual couple and that both of them wanted a divorce. I won't marry until I have avenged our family. The Xander family has stood by our family for 20 years, so I want to repay the favor by helping them overcome their crisis. Also, I plan to use them as a disguise for my revenge. Both you and Mom have sacrificed a lot for the York family. I think of you as my real sister and Mom as my real mother. Right now, my priority is revenge, not romantic love or anything of the sort. Kiran's words sent a sharp pang shooting through Rain's heart. Kiran had suffered just as much as them, too. I believe you, Kiran. Rain threw herself into his arms, sobbing heart-rendingly. Rain! Just then, her phone rang.